It all started on a blazing hot Tuesday, the kind where even your thoughts feel sunburned. I had just pulled up to my townhome, still sweaty from a run to the hardware store, when I noticed something off. My designated parking space, the one I'd used every single day for 3 years, was gone. Not occupied, not blocked. Gone. Painted over. Reassigned. And in its place, a smug little sign that said, "Reserved for HOA committee." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake, a clerical error, a fluke, because no one in their right mind just steals a parking space you pay for, right? But when I called the HOA office and asked to speak with someone about it, I got passed around like a cold caller during dinner time. Finally, I ended up with a woman named Patricia. You already know she sounded exactly like a Karen in training, slow, smug, and chewing gum like she was auditioning for Mean Girls the grown-up years. "Oh, yes," she said casually, like it wasn't a big deal. "The board voted to reassign some of the common parking for official HOA use. Your spot was part of that. I pay monthly dues for that space," I reminded her. "I've got documentation." "Yeah," she said, practically yawning. "You're welcome to file an appeal. It'll be reviewed in 3 months at the next board meeting." 3 months? Where am I supposed to park now? There was a pause. "There's always street parking." I swear I felt my blood pressure spike. Our street had 5 available spaces for a block of 30 units. It was survival of the fittest out there. Parents, delivery drivers, and dog walkers all fighting for inches. Street parking wasn't a solution. It was a war zone. When I asked why my space had been chosen, she said, "We're trying to keep things organized. That's not personal." Yeah, right. Not personal. Except my neighbor, Scott, the HOA vice president and resident lawn perfectionist, had recently gotten into a friendly disagreement with me about the wind chimes on my porch. Apparently, they were too whimsical for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Translation? He didn't like hearing joy in the wind. But I played it cool. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I said thank you, hung up, and took a long walk to calm down. And that's when it hit me. If the HOA wanted my space so badly, they could have it. I'd give it to them, but not the way they expected. I went home, sketched for an hour. Then I drove to the local scrapyard, hardware store, and a little art shop downtown. I cashed out some savings, made phone calls, pulled out my welding gear. By that weekend, I had a plan. If I couldn't have my parking space, then neither could they. At least, not without seeing it transformed into something unforgettable. I started work on Sunday morning, bright and early. The sun was out, birds were chirping, and I was in full-on construction mode. Neighbors peeked out their windows, confused. At first, they thought I was just doing repairs. Then came the scaffolding, the pipes, the hollow metal spheres, and finally, the arms. By the end of the day, I had the base of what looked like a massive figure, part scarecrow, part modern art, part alien nightmare. It was 12 feet tall. I called it the Enforcer. Every day after work, I'd come home and add more. A helmet, wire wings, a metal clipboard in its hand, and a plaque that read, "Dedicated to the HOA for protecting what truly matters, their own parking spots." The response was immediate and delicious. The next morning, Scott came stomping over, red in the face, barking like a man on the edge of a lawsuit. "What the hell is that?" I didn't look up from my welding mask. "Art," I said simply. "You're obstructing common property. You mean your property now, right? I'm just decorating it." "You can't do that?" "Why not? You said it wasn't my space anymore." He threatened fines. He threatened legal action. He even took photos and sent them to the HOA board. But here's the thing. I had already read every single rule in our HOA bylaws. There was nothing about erecting temporary non-commercial installations on HOA property, especially not if it was classified as public expression. I'd built it on a detachable base, no digging, no drilling, no permanent structure, just expression. Scott was livid. Then came Patricia, clipboard in hand, arms crossed, acting like she was preparing for a scene on Judge Judy. She tried the same tactic. "You're in violation of Section 4.5 of the HOA guidelines." "Nope," I said, flipping to that exact section. "That rule applies to permanent personal installations on private property. This is temporary, and it's on what you said is common HOA land." She blinked, caught off guard. Neighbors started to gather. Some were annoyed, but most were laughing. One even asked, "Can we take selfies with it?" I said, "Absolutely. #it. I had HOA art." The HOA tried to hold an emergency vote to have the sculpture removed, but they needed 75% community approval. And guess what? They didn't get it. Why? Because people were tired of being bullied for flower pots, swing sets, and welcome mats. Tired of getting fined for paint colors or mailbox sizes. My giant sculpture became a symbol. People started coming by just to see it. One local artist offered to donate a spotlight. Another guy brought paint and added flames on the helmet. Kids waved at it as they passed. The HOA was furious, and I was just getting started. Because if they thought that was the end of my creativity, they hadn't seen what I had planned for next week. A giant metal bird bath shaped like Patricia's car, with a parking ticket sticking out the window. But first, I had to deal with the next wave of retaliation. The HOA tried something new. They suddenly did care about where I parked after all. They issued a violation notice, claiming my actual car was too close to a fire hydrant, one that had been there, untouched, for decades and wasn't even active. They also sent a photo claiming I had abandoned trash in the yard, which was literally the tools I was using to build. I took it all in stride, because now I had leverage. Public opinion was on my side, the bylaws were my shield, and they were scrambling. I knew they'd either try to escalate legally, or break their own rules in desperation. And they did. They tried to move the sculpture. That's when it got real. The next Friday morning, I woke up to the sound of metal clanging and angry muttering. At first, I thought someone was trying to rob my tools, but when I looked out the window, I saw 2 HOA maintenance workers standing next to the enforcer with a dolly, a chain, and a confused expression. Patricia stood off to the side with her arms folded and a smug grin stretched across her face, as if she'd finally won. Again. I didn't even brush my hair. I ran outside in my slippers, phone in hand, already recording. "Hey!" I shouted. "Step away from the art." One of the workers froze mid-chain. We were told this was garbage? Is that what Patricia told you?" She rolled her eyes. "It's a hazard. You were warned." "No, I was threatened, not warned. And unless you have a removal order or a safety citation, you're tampering with private property." "On HOA land," she countered smugly. I grinned. Actually, wrong again. I turned the camera to a red plastic stake I had hammered into the ground a few feet from the sculpture. Just last week, after her threats escalated, I paid a licensed surveyor to officially mark the edge of the HOA's designated property line. The enforcer stood exactly 2 feet inside my legal boundary, technically my front yard. My sculpture wasn't just art, it was a monument to their failure, now firmly protected by boundary law. Patricia's jaw tightened. The workers looked at each other. We're not getting sued over this." "Good call," I said. "Have a nice day." They packed up and left. Patricia didn't say a word, just stormed off toward her car like a cartoon villain mid-defeat. That would have been enough for most people. A win, a mic drop moment. But me? I was just getting warmed up. I spent the rest of that weekend preparing for my sculpture's grand exhibition. Flyers went up around the neighborhood. The poster said, HOA Appreciation Day, Sculpture Reveal, plus free lemonade. Because if you're going to troll, do it with refreshments. Sunday came fast. By noon, more than 30 neighbors had gathered around the sculpture. Kids laughing, adults sipping lemonade, a few guys even brought lawn chairs. The whole thing felt like a block party, except the unspoken theme was, "Screw the HOA." At 12:30 sharp, I grabbed the megaphone I'd borrowed from a friend and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Enforcer 2.0. I threw the tarp off to reveal the finished masterpiece. The original 12-foot sculpture had now been painted in gold and silver. In its raised hand was a scroll, a replica of the HOA bylaws, with a giant red stamp reading, "Void." The crowd cheered. People took selfies. Someone streamed it live on TikTok. Patricia and Scott were nowhere to be seen. But the best part? A local city councilman, who happened to live 2 blocks over, came by after seeing the post online. He introduced himself and said, "This is the most creative act of protest I've seen in years. You should consider getting this protected as public art." "Public art?" I repeated, stunned. "Yup, get it recognized. Makes it harder for anyone to touch it again without facing penalties." My smile nearly cracked my face in half. That night, I filled out the paperwork. 2 days later, I got confirmation. The Enforcer was now officially recognized as temporary public artwork of residential expression. Let that sink in. They stole my parking spot. I gave them a sculpture. They tried to remove it. I made it untouchable. And just when I thought I'd won everything, fate threw me a bonus round. A letter arrived from the HOA's own legal advisor, not addressed to me, but addressed to every resident. It was a formal notification that the HOA president, Patricia, had been asked to step down temporarily pending an investigation into misuse of funds, abuse of authority, and potential zoning misrepresentation. Scott had already resigned as VP a week earlier, for personal reasons. Neighbors who once stayed quiet suddenly found their voices. They started sharing stories, fines for flowers, flags, front door wreaths, retaliation for minor complaints, threats, lies. My story was the matchstick, and the whole neighborhood had been a dry forest waiting for a spark. At the next emergency HOA meeting, over 80% of homeowners voted for an immediate board restructure. 3 members were ousted, and a new committee was formed, made up of people who actually lived here, listened, and wanted fairness. I didn't run for any position. I didn't want the power. I just wanted peace. And my damn parking space. A week later, I got an email from the new HOA board. "Dear resident, due to the recent property reassessment and resident feedback, your original parking space has been reinstated. Please see attached documentation confirming your assigned spot. Sincerely, Willow Meadows HOA, Reformed." I laughed so hard I nearly cried. I walked out, past the sculpture, and into my newly returned space, parked, stepped out, and just stood there for a moment, soaking it all in. They took my spot. So I took their pride, their power, and their silence. I guess summed it. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully isn't yelling or lawsuits. It's art. Petty, glorious steel-welded art. And in case you're wondering, yeah, the Enforcer is still standing. Someone even added sunglasses to him last week. At night, he's lit up like a guardian, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been told you can't by someone hiding behind a rule book. Because now, we write the rules.